Greetings, everyone. I'm Jacob Abell, Assistant Professor of French at Baylor University.
And I'm Lynn Ramey, Professor of French at Vanderbilt University.
We are pleased to share with you our presentation entitled In the Virtual Marketplace, Learning Dead Languages and Cultures Through Content and Language Integrated Learning. Our work concerns a language learning video game project that we are developing with support from the National Endowment for the Humanities in the United States.
The resulting game, whose prototype is nearly finished, intends to teach basic pronunciation, grammar, and vocabulary of Anglo-Norman, a culturally important dialect of medieval French. First, we'll review some background of the game and its relevance for content and language integrated learning.
Content and language integrated learning has stressed the importance of teaching grammar through the study of the cultures in which a language is spoken and written. CLIL approaches combine subject area learning with a target language acquisition, engaging learners and requiring them to situate their language skills within a complex and challenging matrix, often immersed in the target culture. Video games and other digital immersive environments are well suited to achieve this goal. But unfortunately, CLIL compliant games are rare, even for modern languages. For instance, Slime Forest Adventure teaches elements of the Japanese language, but the game mechanics, killing slime and rescuing a princess, provide an engaging and gamified experience that does not allow students to understand Japanese culture better or combine language learning with subject area learning. Playing commercial off-the-shelf games, such as Call of Duty, in the target language has allowed modern language users to immerse themselves in a language experience. These games arguably offer contextualized language learning, but to have a truly effective CLIL experience, learning within and about the target language culture is essential. The ability to change the target language of the game necessarily flattens the target culture to one that approaches the culture of game production. Learn Japanese RPG, Hiragana Forbidden Speech, is an example of a modern language learning game that recognizes and addresses this problem by leveraging the worlds of Japanese anime.
Even a flattened cultural experience is not available for many languages, and the potential of CLIL to teach dead languages is still vastly underexplored. To that end, we explore one learning module of Brendan's Voyage, an online video game designed to teach medieval French language through a series of learning activities that immerse the player within culturally significant tales from the 12th century, in which the target language evolved. In development with support from the National Endowment for the Humanities, Brendan's Voyage offers a scalable model for other teachers of dead languages and past cultures who look to revolutionize their pedagogies and increase learner motivation through modern language learning, acquisition, and teaching paradigms. Here you can see an example of the codex feature in the game where the player can organize and refer back to the vocabulary and grammar that they have learned so far in the game. These images come to us from Causeway Studios, the professional game design firm helping to create the game itself.
Brendan's Voyage is comprised of 5 successive modules that initially position the player in the French-speaking court of Lady Adeliza of Leuven, the 12th century figure who commissioned the translation of the Brendan tale from Latin into Anglo-Norman French. In Module 1, the player meets the queen in her palace and learns basic greetings and vocabulary in Anglo-Norman French. You can see an image here of Lady Adeliza on the left from the player's perspective. These basic language learning goals are accomplished through cultural immersion activities, from learning about female patronage of medieval poetry to discovering the importance of St. Brendan for 12th century English culture. Having received a commission from the Queen to translate the Brendan story into Anglo-Norman, the player proceeds to a monastic scriptorium in Module 2. And in the center of our slide here, you can see a tapestry that the player encounters modeled on the famous Bayeux tapestries, commemorating the arrival of the Normans in England. On the far left, the player is invited to open a codex found in the scriptorium. In this second module, a monk arrives and helps the player acquire a more expansive Anglo-Norman vocabulary, while the player learns elements of medieval manuscript production. As with Module 1, this portion of the game realizes CLIL's goal of offering language instruction through immersion in the target language's culture. Module 3, discussed below, conveys the player to a medieval market.
Modules 4 and 5 take place in ancient Ireland, where the player is magically transported within the story of St. Brendan. These final modules advance the player's learning of Anglo-Norman while incorporating exposure to late antique Irish monasticism and maritime voyages as imagined by later medieval audiences. Thus, the game unfolds in two phases. The first modules conduct the player through the world of the Brendan story's material production in the Middle Ages. By contrast, the final modules allow a glimpse, however fanciful, of the much older Irish world that constitutes the narrative of the Brendan poem. These two phases of the video game present two additional and distinctive medieval cultures that shape the learning environments of the game's language learning activities.
One of the main cultural priorities animating the game design is to expose players to the rich multilingualism of 12th century English life. This goal becomes explicit in Module 3, which invites players to explore a medieval market within the walls of Lady Adelise's palace. Having been tasked with translating and transcribing the Brendan tale from Latin into Anglo-Norman French, the player must now acquire the necessary items for the task, such as ink ingredients. Working with our video game design counterparts at Causeway Studios, we prioritized an environment that would reflect the multilingual setting of medieval English markets. As in the contemporary world, medieval markets formed a nexus of global trade, with sailors, merchants, and artisans would conduct their business together in a range of languages. To take just one example, lapis lazuli, appearing in medieval manuscripts, was famously sourced from Afghanistan. This fact is explicitly incorporated into the gameplay of Brendan's Voyage. At one point during the third module, the player purchases ingredients from different stalls, requiring the player to read a letter from a merchant indicating his purchases of Tunisian spices and Afghan lapis lazuli. And on this slide, you can see a screenshot here of one area of the market from this third module of Brendan's Voyage.
As this example illustrates, the many commercial goods of medieval markets signified the diverse destinations and sources of these objects and their vendors, necessitating a corresponding diversity of global languages. Such multilingualism also characterized medieval literary translation and production, which is prominent in the story of St. Brendan. In addition to the Anglo-Norman translation, the original Latin poem was translated into a host of other languages, including Catalan and Old Dutch. We wanted the experience to reflect the multilingual history of the source text, while simultaneously illustrating the linguistic diversity of the medieval market. As a result, players encounter greetings in Anglo-Norman, Catalan, and medieval Dutch while moving about the market stalls. While no activity within the module asks the player to comprehend the vocabulary of these other languages, the user is still valuably immersed in authentic linguistic exposure to diverse languages that typified medieval commerce and textual transmission alike.
This environment of immersive multilingual and multicultural exposure frames the module's explicit task of learning simple present tense conjugations for key Anglo-Norman verbs, such as to buy, as well as relevant vocabulary. The commercial vocabulary is itself derived from the Anglo-Norman Brendan text, featuring nouns like candle, wax, and wood. The game script also incorporates precious stones like amethyst, which are prominently featured in the story of St. Brendan. This approach ensures that the modular vocabulary is not arbitrary, but instead reflects key terms that are culturally significant to the narrative culture informing the game design. Players of the video game, be they scholars or students, are prepared to use their new language knowledge as a tool to interact with a particular story and an authentic manuscript tradition. For example, in Module 3, the player converses with a merchant, explaining the need to purchase supplies for manuscript transcription. The merchant replies that he has all the supplies needed for such a long task, including candles and oil. Then the merchant offers food for the task ahead. I will bring you enough provisions, and I will find you a great abundance of meat for the long days ahead. The expressions, I will bring you enough provisions, and I will find you a great abundance of meat, are both lifted directly from passages in the Anglo-Norman Voyage of St. Brendan the Abbot. Thus, when the player hears the expression, de viande je vous trouverai plante grande, I will find you a great abundance of meat, the player receives comprehensible linguistic input directly sourced from an authentic text in the medieval target culture.
This multilingual approach works against any stereotype of the Middle Ages as a time of linguistic purity. It is well established that many nationalist groups in the United States and in Europe have perennially fashioned false narratives of cultural and linguistic purity attached to medieval cultures. This construal of the Middle Ages cannot withstand historical scrutiny, given the extreme diversity of complex languages and cultures that saturated medieval environments, such as England in the 12th century. Despite the historical evidence contradicting these nationalist appropriations of medieval pasts, the stereotypes persist. Using CLIL as a guiding pedagogical framework, Brendan's Voyage emphasizes medieval multilingualism to reclaim a historically informed account of cultural diversity within medieval cultures. CLIL has been known to increase, quote, positivity towards plurilingualism and pluriculturalism, end of quote, since the 1990s. Our video game builds on these past successes in the contemporary language classroom. Foregrounding multilingualism in Brendan's Voyage extends CLIL's demonstrated uses to help combat nefarious stereotypes through dead language instruction.
The Middle Ages, often construed as a monolingual era, were in fact linguistically diverse. Brendan's Voyage, drawing inspiration from the CLIL framework, offers an accurate portrayal challenging prevailing myths. By spotlighting medieval multilingualism and the intricate ties between language and culture, the game stands as a testament to the value of plurilingualism in education and asserts the importance of integrating language learning with its cultural and historical context. Thank you very much for listening to our presentation. We would welcome your feedback or your questions. I can be reached at jake_abel@baylor.edu. My colleague Lynn Ramey can be reached at lynn.ramey@vanderbilt.edu. And the head of Causeway Studios, our video game design counterparts, can be reached at Chartan, that is KJARTAN, at causewaystudios.com. So thank you very much for your time, and we look forward to being in touch.